Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this ongoing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome everyone to the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility on absolutely a gorgeous Tuesday. It is the 6th day of May, and I welcome you to the Virtual Center. I'm very, very pleased that you are here. I understand that we had some technical difficulties yesterday, and for those that were listening in real time, we didn't come across. What we do have, and I didn't know that, and so that's a good thing, because what we ended up with, what we in effect did was record 2 hours yesterday, and it's in the archives, and but nobody was able to listen to it in real time. I didn't find that out until today, which is fine because the program is there, and I'm glad I didn't know it, because I probably wouldn't have put as much into the program as I did when I thought there were real live listeners out there, but that's fine. And I have had the option, and we're going to do that to pre-record programs like that. I don't like to, while I know that we can do that, I'm much more, I much prefer the idea that there are live people out there and that people might call me on what I say and what I do, and I feel that if there are live people out there listening rather than just recording it for those that would listen in the future, then you can't get into it as much. It seems to me, and I think this particular issue that we've been talking about is so important that we need to get into it. So anyway, there is a program from yesterday, May 5th. That is available on the archives. I encourage you to look at it. Since most of you listening today would probably have not have had the opportunity to hear it, then I will feel a little bit comfortable today mentioning a few things that I might have mentioned yesterday that you don't know about yet until you get a chance to go to the archives. But the fact of the matter is, Bob reminded me, some time ago, several days ago, that we began our program last year in March. I was thinking it was in April sometime. It was in March. So in a sense, what we're looking at is about 14 months of programs. And, we recorded programs, which, even though we've missed some for weather and power outages and a number of other things, fact of the matter is we've probably got well in excess of 100 hours of programs available in the archives, and I just think that's terrific. I don't know, I don't know. I'm hoping at some point in time we'll be able to do something with these, and it's just my honor to be able to do something like this. I really mean it. Before going on, I want to basically deal with the phone number, give you the phone number and my email address and those kinds of things as I usually do. Our phone number is area code 304-658-3333. That's 304-658-3333. If you'd like to communicate directly with me via email, I would love to hear from you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien906, all one word, @gmail.com. I also want to mention, again, I mentioned it yesterday, but obviously, since we were not live yesterday, obviously those listening today wouldn't have heard this, so let me repeat it again. We'll have our program today, and we'll be here tomorrow, same time. But the end of this week, over the weekend, I'm going to be traveling, and we're driving west to St. Louis to spend a few days with a friend, and then we're driving south from St. Louis to go to a grandson's graduation. high school graduation, and he'll be coming back in the back east. It's my wife's grandson, and he'll be coming back east in the fall. He's got a scholarship to Rutgers University in New Jersey, and he's going to be coming back east and much closer and handier to us than he has been in the years that they've been in Kansas. But you know, he's a good student. We're really proud of him, and you know, as a stepdad who only came into his life 7 or 8 years ago. You know, he was a little boy when my wife and I got together, and now he's graduating from high school, and he and I have become pretty good friends. And you know, he's when he was applying for different colleges and universities, he was asking me about them and asking me about ways that he ought to structure his applications and which institutions he ought to look seriously at and those kinds of things. And I'll be very honest with you, I'm flattered that he trusted me enough and feels comfortable enough with me to do that, because a lot of times, you know, I kind of was foisted on him. If I'm part of his life, it's nothing to do with him. I was kind of dumped on him, so to speak. And the fact that we have developed this relationship and that he trusts me enough to call me on my cell phone frequently and tell me that he got a letter from such and such an institution and how he should respond to it and these kinds of questions, I'm really flattered by it. And part of that is that I've been telling him that when he graduates from high school, we'll be there, and so we will be there. So for the next 2 weeks after today's program, we'll be traveling this coming weekend, and then we'll be attending the graduation, which is the following weekend, the 16th and 17th of May. And then the first of that week, Monday, we'll be heading back east, and so we won't get back until probably Thursday of that week. So for the next 2 weeks, we'll be filling the time slot here at the Virtual Center with pre-recorded programs. And I know there's one from yesterday that nobody's heard yet, so so we have a few of those, and I encourage you to, you know, if you've missed some, to tune in and listen to those. So again, I wanted everybody to know that we will be here regular time tomorrow, but then for the next 2 weeks, they will be pre-recorded programs, repeat programs from previous programs. So I wanted to know that. And again, our phone number, area code 304-658-3333. Yesterday, I was making the point at the beginning of the program about today. I mentioned that today at noon, I was, you know, as I've mentioned a number of times, when we do our program a little bit earlier, it's usually because I have some sort of a Rotary meeting in the evening. I'm the president of the Rotary Club here in Southern West Virginia, the Beckley Rotary Club, through July, 1st of July. So I've got, you know, another month and half to go, so to speak. And today, at our regular weekly meeting at noon, I delivered the program on this issue of the Article 5, the Second Constitutional Convention, the issues surrounding it, the call for it, what the potential is. But, you know, we looked at sections of Hamilton's Federalist 85 and all of that. Now, this was a program that only lasted 30 minutes, so it was kind of down and dirty, quick, fast job. But I was kind of primed for this today, and I kind of wanted to share with you a few of the things that happened. One of the members of the club, who's a very, very good friend of mine, he's a minister. In fact, he is a good friend. He married my wife and me. And he, you know, as I recall, he practically fell over in disbelief when I approached him and asked him if he would be willing to do us the honor of marrying us. And he was stunned, you know, flattered and stunned. And ever since then, this was 8 years ago plus, we've become very good friends. He is a brilliant guy in a lot of ways. His PhD in theology, well-read, teaches philosophy at the college level, has taught courses in philosophy. Very, very bright, very, you know, very, very intelligent, and very conservative. And we have argued back and forth a number of times on a number of different issues. mainly associated with the health care issue and things like that. But at the same time, we are fast friends, and we agree to disagree, and we do that. But anyway, in the course of the program today, in my presentation, he and I walked into the facility together at noon today, and he knew what the program was going to be because I had sent out an email to all the club members letting them know that I was going to be doing the program today, and I kind of acknowledge it's really difficult because usually I write this very positive promotion to try to encourage people to come by telling them what the program's going to be and how interesting it's going to be. And I made the point in my email this week that since I was going to be the program, it was a little bit difficult to do. And I said the only thing I can tell you, I told him it was going to be on Article 5, and I said basically I think it's very important, but on the other hand, that's my challenge. I'm going to have to basically make that case as to how important it is. So that was our program today. But anyway, when we were walking into the facility, my friend Bob made the comment and said, I hope you're not going to argue against the convention because the Constitution says it must be held. And I said, no, I agree with you. It must be held. That's what the Constitution says. There's no question. Congress really doesn't have the option of not doing it unless Congress can make the case that the 2/3 of the states required really aren't there because the call for the convention has stretched out over so long. This call for a convention to consider a federal, national level balanced budget amendment has been ongoing since the late 60s. And so many of the people that originally supported the call for a convention to consider an amendment for a balanced budget, many of those people have passed away because this has been ongoing for, almost a half century. And besides that, some states, not many, but some states that originally issued a call for a second convention, after that time rescinded the call, especially when the makeup of those state legislatures changed and maybe the political affiliation of the party in control of the state legislatures changed. The result was that many states that had originally called for one have rescinded their call. And now one of the decisions John Boehner is going to have to make is whether, in fact, it is legitimate to rescind one's call, or is it the situation where once you make the call, you can't change your mind? And, the Constitution does not address that issue. And so this is clearly going to be a court issue. And if it's going through the courts, it's going to be a matter of how long it's going to take to go through that process. So it's not clear yet that the Constitution will be held. But there's absolutely no question that when 34 states, 2/3, call for the convention, Congress shall convene such a convention. Article 5 says that. So anyway, Bob's comment was, we've got to have it. I hope you're not going to make a case that we shouldn't have it. And I said, no, I agree with you that if we have the 2/3 of the states, then we need to have it because it is the law of the land. But Congress doesn't have the option to not call it. And he said, well, I will admit that there are some frightening features about it. And I said, well, that's really going to be my presentation. And that was my presentation. And at the end of it, Bob and I were chatting, and he made the comment that the two sources that I cited, George Will being one, and I quoted extensively from a letter that I quoted from yesterday, and I'll kind of make reference to that today as well. But I don't want to spend the entire program and redo yesterday's program. That's ridiculous. It's already archived. But there's a variety of different opinions and issues. I mean, this is all over the internet. It's all over. There are blogs everywhere on this. Clearly, the political right are the people that are most in support of the calling of such a convention. And Bob's point was that he's a real believer in the idea of a balanced budget, and he's putting his focus more on the issue of a balanced budget amendment than he is what might happen once that convention convenes. And that was my presentation today. So his point was, you quoted from an extreme position from the internet, and the other person you quoted is George Will, whose recent claim to fame is that he just wrote a book on the history of Wrigley Field. It's unfair to quote these people on an issue like this. And my response to him was, George Will, especially George Will, is one of the most reputable columnists in the nation today, and he writes for one of the most widely circulated newspapers in the nation, which is the Washington Post. And he reaches and influences tens of thousands, if not millions of people. And if he took it upon himself to write this position and to take Alexander Hamilton out of context and make him a supporter of states' rights when he's anything but a supporter of states' rights, then my position is that he's fair game. And I don't think I was out of line quoting him at all. And I told Bob today, I said that's one of the major issues that I think we're all going to have to face, is that the way progressives have responded to the conservative challenge is to adhere to the idea we must be fair, when in fact there is nothing fair about the vitriol and the level of attacks that are coming from the right on the president, on his health care plan, on the president of the Senate, the majority leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, and the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and all the rest of it. And I said the level of lack of civility that we're seeing in our political situation today is in large part, the bulk of it is coming from the right, and I basically made that point with him today. And my position is, when you have a debate, a political debate, Bob, and one side has to be fair and the other side doesn't believe it does, then that's a little bit unfair. So to challenge my presentation today because I quoted George Will, I think is a little bit out of bounds. Who was I supposed to quote? The other person I quoted, by the way, was Alexander Hamilton, and I quoted him correctly. Will didn't. So anyway, that's kind of where we are. And again, I'm not at all. I think that's the danger here. The balanced budget amendment is so popular. I'm not totally opposed to the idea of a balanced budget amendment at all, except, in theory. I mean, it would be wonderful. All of us need to live within our means, so to speak. But the fact of the matter is, in today's world, the passage of such an amendment would emasculate social programs, would emasculate the social net, would only safety net, would only hurt certain groups of people, would benefit other people who don't need any more assistance than they're already getting in terms of the economy and the market and kind of backhanded regulations and all the rest of it. So in a sense, I really believe that to talk about a balanced budget amendment in this climate now is clearly political. It's not a call for fairness. It's an effort to try to impose fairness on a politically unfair situation. And to say, all right, now that we're in control, now we're going to go back and we're going to have an honest, fair debate about something called a balanced budget amendment. I think that's naive and it's unfair. It's kind of like one of the amendments that the 10th Amendment that Mark Levin advocates in his Liberty Amendments book is the idea of voter IDs. Most of us, on the surface, I mean, it's hard to argue against the idea that if they're going to check your identification, then you should have to prove who you are. I mean, it's hard to argue against that. But the fact of the matter is, in today's world with photo IDs, the people that have the most difficulty acquiring them are the very people pushing the legislation. These are the people that the people who are pushing the legislation want to keep from the voting booths. So this is, on the surface, an argument for fairness and legitimacy in a political world in which the situation is not fair and legitimate at all. I mean, it's clearly political, and I think state after state is beginning that originally went along with the idea of requiring photo IDs and reducing the number of days for early voting and all the rest of it. I think many of those states are beginning to look and recognize that there's a little bit more politics to this than they thought about going in. And that's what I think the call for the Second Amendment issue, this call for the Second Constitutional Convention is all about as well. This morning, I taught on Tuesdays, as many of you have known in the past. I teach a class of senior citizens. I'm one now myself, but I've been doing it for more than 20 years. Almost every Tuesday morning. I'm going to miss the next 2 weeks because I'll be traveling. But effectively, I've been doing this, for 9 months a year, the full academic year, since the early 90s. So it's in excess of 20 years that I've been doing the senior citizen class. And of course, the bulk of the students that I had years ago have passed away, and the organization is finding it very difficult to replace people because, unfortunately, as a senior citizens organization, people tend to pass away. But my class this morning, it's very interesting that one of the we talked about this in class this morning, in the senior citizens class this morning. And one of the members of the group, one of the students in the class, clearly pointed to the issue that an issue that I pointed out yesterday, which is the idea that be very careful what you sow. We reap what we sow. And the people pushing for this convention need to be aware of what the potential is. George Will, and we talked about this in yesterday's program, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it, but George Will's piece in the Washington Post made the case that the Goldwater Institute's draft amendment for a balanced budget amendment, would include rules for the convention to operate by. And one of the things that they would agree on is that the states that would be participating would make a compact going in that the convention can only deal with this one issue, that the convention will only sit for 24 hours, and that if it violates those guidelines, if it lasts for more than 24 hours, or tries to veer into other issues other than the balanced budget amendment itself, then all the work of the convention is negated and voided. And the other thing is that the representatives of each state at such a convention would be the governors of the states affected, the participating states. And George Will's argument is this is going to satisfy those who are afraid of a runaway convention. Well, it's not satisfying me, because the Constitutional Convention of 1787 was a runaway convention. We've only had one convention so far, and it was a runaway convention. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 was called for the express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. And it's only when a quorum was achieved and the convention was gavelled into existence did its members make the decision to shelve the Articles of Confederation, rule them not amendable or not revisable, and then basically start all over again with what history knows as Madison's Virginia Plan. And that, with revisions, becomes the substance of the Constitution that ultimately comes out of the convention in September of 1787. So the fact of the matter is, the only convention we've ever had the one that drafted our Constitution, was a runaway convention. So committed, so ideologically committed to change in our system of government are those pushing hardest for this convention. The Mark Levins and the George Wills and the Sean Hannitys and all the rest of them. The fact that they are on the media, they are in terrestrial talk radio all the time. Mark Levin is on every single night. He's influencing tens of thousands, if not millions of people. And these folks are ideologically committed to substantial changes in our constitutional system that go way beyond a balanced budget amendment. The balanced budget amendment is but one of 10 proposed amendments in Mark Levin's book. And we're going to look at those today. So the fact of the matter is, these people are so ideologically driven to change that it would be the height of naivete to assume that they're going to pass up this one chance in a lifetime to enact their agenda. That they've waited their entire lives for this opportunity, and then to say, well, I guess we can't introduce these things today because the states have agreed by compact to not consider these things. I doubt very much that that's going to happen. So the fact of the matter is, there's too much pressure coming from too many different directions to turn this convention into a runaway convention by exploring other issues beyond the balanced budget amendment. There's too much pressure for additional change to believe, even for a moment, that the convention would stick to a compact, whatever that compact was. So the irony of the situation, and I think it is ironic, the irony of the situation is that the George Wills and those other people that are putting their emphasis on the balanced budget amendment as the basis of what a second convention would be about are using this principally to pacify and reassure the suspicious that they needn't worry about the dangers of a second convention. I would suggest to you, and here's the irony, that's exactly the same reason that the state-called convention route is even in Article 5 of the Constitution. Hamilton's Federalist 85 is exactly the same thing as that. It's an effort to point to that in Article 5 in order to reassure the suspicious that the Constitution is safe, that it's okay to ratify the Constitution because there is an amendment provision in it. And then to point to that and say, even the states, if 2 3rds of them can get together, can call another convention. So what Hamilton is telling the unconvinced in New York is, feel safe voting for it because this is in there. This provision is in there. The states could call a second convention. It's in Article 5. But if you read him very carefully, he doesn't advocate it. He doesn't want it. He doesn't believe that it'll ever be used. So he's looking at it clearly as a political sop in order to reassure the frightened about the dangers of the power of the central government under the Constitution. George Will's doing the same thing. George Will is suggesting that if we make compacts and if we make agreements going in, we can control the convention so there's nothing to be afraid of. It's political. It was political in 1787. and in 1788, and it's political now. And as I mentioned yesterday, I believe that it is absolutely essential that we do everything we can do to bring the light of day on this, and to basically shine the light on those people who are really behind, the people that are bankrolling this effort. And we know who they are. They are, and here I'm citing Hamilton's Federalist 85, the very last paragraph of the last Federalist paper. Hamilton says, a nation without a national government is, in my view, an awful spectacle. We would be, what Hamilton is saying, if we do anything to defeat a national government, if we don't follow through on this Constitution and create a national government, we are going to be the laughingstock of the civilized world. We are going to be an awful spectacle. We are going to look ridiculous. So then he says, the establishment of a constitution in time of profound peace by the voluntary consent of a whole people is a prodigy. And he basically capitalizes the word prodigy to emphasize the power of that word, to the completion of which I look forward with trembling anxiety. What Hamilton is saying is, we're so close to creating, to ratifying this Constitution by national government, and thereby earning, not by revolution, but in a period of peace, with the consent of the whole entire population, with the consent of the people, we've been able to do this, is indeed unique. It breaks precedent. It's unbelievable. And then he says, I can reconcile it to no rules of prudence to let go the hold we now have in so arduous an enterprise upon 7 out of the 13 states. We've got 7 states that have already ratified. We're so close. It frightens me to death to think that we could lose it all. So I'm looking forward to ratification, he says, but I'm looking forward to it with trembling anxiety. I'm afraid we might blow it. And it's clear from what he's done with Federalist 85 that the second convention is the way we would blow it. I think it is incredible that Hamilton devoted the very final paper in the series of Federalist Papers, number 85, the paper in which he would sum up the rest and tell the citizens of the state of New York, this is what we've done in our papers, in our series so far. This is what we tried to do with the Federalist Papers. The fact that he would take the last one and use it to address the greatest threat to losing the whole thing, which would be a second convention. And the last sentence in the last Federalist paper, Hamilton says, I dread the more the consequences of new attempts, because I know that powerful individuals, and he capitalizes powerful individuals, in this and in other states, are enemies to a general national government in every possible shape. The last thing that Hamilton says in the last Federalist paper, beware of those people in the states that don't want a powerful or an effective or a stable and secure national government, and will do anything they can do to sabotage it. It seems to me that we would be foolish to ignore the wisdom of Alexander Hamilton about the dangers of a second convention. I suggest if you take Hamilton seriously and you begin to look at who's behind this movement today for a second convention, it becomes very clear, as Hamilton said, that there are powerful individuals in the nation today who are opposed to the power of the central government and want to do everything they can do to emasculate it. I made the point today in the class with seniors, and I just wanted to share this with you because this is just an observation on my part. Like most folks, I've been struck by the lack of civility in our political discussions today, in the world, in the nation today. And I've been horrified at some of the things being said about the President of the United States. I never thought that I would live long enough to hear a member of Congress stand up and call the President of the United States a liar. But I heard it. I've heard things said about this president that are unbelievable. And I know that defenders of the critics of this president will say, hell, they accuse President Clinton's in Arkansas of killing people, you know, in the Whitewater situation and all of that. So this is just the latest version of what's been going on for a long time. They called Andrew Jackson an adulterer. So the fact of the matter is, what people are trying to do is justify the lack of civility in our political debates today by going back through history and citing examples when it was uncivil before. I'm not sure that that legitimizes or justifies it. The fact that this is a minority president, it seems to me, has put this president in a very special category in terms of him becoming a target. And like most folks, I've measured the hatred, and I'm using that word advisedly, the hatred that is being directed towards the president. I've measured the level of it in the lack of success or success of the president's health care plan. And I've seen an awful lot of opposition to the president and opposition to the Affordable Care Act crystallize around opposition to the Affordable Care Act. And like many of you, I'm guessing, I'm kind of encouraged and inclined to believe that the fact that there are more than 8 million people that have signed up for the Affordable Care Act suggests that we've weathered the storm, that we've gotten over the hump. Now with the second convention issue, I'm beginning to realize that that's not true. That while an awful lot of the hatred and the negativism that's been directed at this president was directed at his health care plan, a lot of it is behind this movement for a second convention. And there's absolutely no question that the opponents of this president and the opponents of a strong national government have zeroed in on Article 5 of the Constitution as a possible strategy for success that they are close to realizing. In the class that we just completed here at the University of Charleston, one of the last units we dealt with in the class, in the survey history class, of course, was the Cold War, was the modern period since World War II. And the two major themes, as most history classes do, are the Cold War internationally and the Civil Rights Movement domestically. And one of the things I felt it was necessary to do is link those two and suggest that the extent to which the Civil Rights Movement in America was directly connected, linked to our successful ability to rebut the challenge, the Soviet challenge in the Cold War. That America's need to capture and build alliances of non-aligned nations, most of them Southern Hemisphere non-white nations, required that we do something domestically about the way that we were treating blacks in the United States of America in terms of legitimizing and legalizing segregation, separate but equal. So my feeling was that there was an international, an international side or an international facet of the Civil Rights Movement. We had to recognize it. It would be naive to not recognize that these two were indeed connected. But the fact of the matter is, and I'm having a senior moment here. I've kind of lost my train of thought, but that's okay. I'll come back to it. I'll come back to it again. But anyway, the point I wanted to make is that there are real issues and real enemies here. I don't think that we can afford to ignore Hamilton's advice that he would spend the last of 85 Federalist essays addressing the dangers of a second convention and then making specific reference to those people within the states who will accept nothing less than the destruction of the government created by this Constitution. I think we would be naive to ignore that advice. One of the things that I wanted to try to do today, and I would love to hear from you on this issue, and I say that, we would all love to hear from you. 883333, if you are inclined to weigh in on this particular issue, and I encourage you to do it. The more attention, the more we weigh in on this, the more light of day we bring to the subject. Fox News is suggesting that CNN and MSNBC and some of the so-called mainstream media have made the decision to bury this issue of the Second Convention. In fact, Fox News specifically accused CNN of spending so much time and so much attention on the missing airliner in the Pacific, primarily in order to avoid this issue. It's hard to, obviously, it's hard to prove that. But the fact of the, it's hard to prove why people are not covering the ideological commitment of a remote chance. in this kind of political environment. But the danger here is that people who believe it might happen would support the idea of the Second Convention. And I think all of us need to think very, very seriously about that and do what we can. I think we do need a national conversation on this issue. Because I believe that it might just be the most important issue to confront the nation in the last 200 years. I'm not convinced, however, that it's an opportunity. I see it as a challenge. To the fact that in some of the literature that I quoted yesterday from the internet, I wanted to make the case that there are really some strange dudes out there who are coming out from under rocks at the thought that there might be a second convention. I'm not suggesting that these people will be elected as delegates to such a convention. Is one that some of the major financial and political interests in promoting it have zeroed in on. Most of us have believed that the contest is going to be, but I would suggest to you that the strategy of going at it from the perspective of Article 5, calling of a convened state legislatures to do it, is a very, very successful strategy. Mark Levin points that out at the beginning of his book. His very opening, the first third of the book, focuses on the opportunities available to those who would demean and weaken the power of the central government might have found the vehicle to pull it off in Article 5. The tens of millions of dollars that are being poured into campaigns, even in order to replace them with new people who will do the bidding of those that are funding this effort. Some of the most, I think, commendable people, so-called moderate Republicans, which are becoming less and less likely to find nowadays. The pending retirement, for example, of Olympia Snowe, the defeat of John Danforth, the loss in the Senate of Alan Simpson in the mid-90s, because Mitch McConnell isn't conservative enough in that he showed too much beginning to realize that the degree of opposition that existed is really behind this indirect strategy of coming at the national government through the state legislatures. And the success of that is reflected in the fact that 26 states refused to participate in the CARE Act. And the fact that these people would have the kind of state legislatures with millions of uninsured citizens, at least for the first 3 years, by the federal government, in order to a political point, an ideological point, suggests to me just how serious the people are who are out to pull this off, and in the agendas that are evident out there now. The senior moment that I had before, the point that I lost was, in the class that I was teaching, one of the things that we talked about was that the military strategy in World War II in prosecuting the was to do damage to the threat of Soviet communism by postponing the so-called Second Front the evidence suggests that Stalin was asking for a second front in Europe as early as 1942 because Russia was being punished terribly by the Nazis. And the only way to take the pressure off the Soviet Union was to launch a second front in Western Europe, which would force the Germans to fight a two-front war. Churchill was able to convince FDR that an alternative strategy, military strategy, was the best one. And that was to go at Nazi Germany from the south by launching an attack in North Africa, coming across the south, which took 2 years. And it's very clear that the reason for that alternative strategy was to make sure that Germany had an opportunity to do serious damage to the Soviet Union. And there's absolutely no question that we paid for that in our dealings with the Soviet Union in World War II. And that diversion strategy, that decision to not take on the enemy directly, but come at it from an unexpected direction, the so-called soft underbelly, if you will, of Nazi Germany, is very similar to this. Instead of trying to win control of the national government in national elections by winning the war, it's clear that those bankrolling convention measured by the number of states that refused to participate in the Affordable Care Act when it would clearly benefit their own citizens. And yet they made the decision to deny their own citizens health care in pursuit of what might just be a bigger prize. And I would suggest to you that the calling of this second convention just might be that prize. Before we finish this hour, then, let me kind of set up a scenario for the next hour. Some folks who are pushing for a second convention. What I'm talking about specifically is looking critically and analytically at the various amendments proposed by Mark Levin in the Liberty Amendments, because this clearly is the agenda of thinking conservatives. This clearly identifies what they want to do. And the irony is, the most extreme nutcase that you can find on the internet, no matter how extreme their positions, is doing what John Jay found himself doing prior to American independence in 1774 and 1775. In order to keep control of the movement for independence that we have launched, we've got to stay out in front of it. Because if we bail out, interests will take over this movement that we can't control anymore. We can't let the mob take control. We've got to maintain it, John Jay said. And in order to do that, I'm being forced to become much more revolutionary and much more radical than I ever dreamed that I would be. Because the only way that I can keep control of this movement is to stay out in front of it. I would suggest to you that that's what and we better be careful. So what I would like to do in our second hour is take a look at the extremes. Just look at a couple of comments from the wingnuts, and then look at the more serious efforts of Mark Levin and thinking to emasculate the government of the United States. Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome back to our second hour here at the Virtual Center. It's 7 minutes after the hour of 5 in the East on this 6th day of May. It is a pleasure. If you've been with us since our first hour, I thank you for staying. If you are just joining the Constitutional Convention that we all know about in 1787 was a runaway convention. And in other words, even though it was precedent that's been successful. But with that, one of the things that we talked about doing in this hour is looking at the proposed amendments, the so-called Liberty Amendments. We went through these some months ago, as many of you will know. But I think on this occasion, it's worth going back into it again. A couple of questions that I was asked today. One person wanted to know how much of this movement is recent. In other words, where did the call for the Second Convention stand? My point was that, you know, in the fall, when the big debate was focusing on the launching, the failed launch, if you will, of the Affordable Care Act, there were 26 states, and I think that's where those promoting a second issue become. The fact of the matter is that the substance comes from these amendments, which suggests that the people who are penning these extreme positions are getting their information from those that are orchestrating the move toward the convention. I don't think we can assume that there's an intellectual level of discussion going on in one place, and then there's all of this extreme from out from under rock stuff going on elsewhere, and that the two are not connected. They are clearly connected. The substance for this is coming from sources like the Mark Levin book. And I think it's important to make that case. And so I want to do that. But first, let's just quickly scan the amendments that Mark Levin proposes in his book, published in August 2013, called the Liberty Amendments. The first one is an amendment to establish term limits for members of Congress. As you know now, we have people in Congress that continue to be elected year after year after, election after election every 2 years. And we have members sitting in the United States Senate who've been there for a long time. This amendment would establish term limits for members of Congress where they could only serve for a certain period, and we'll go back, it's 12 years, we'll go back to that. The second proposed amendment is an amendment to restore the Senate. And what that means is to overturn the 1913 amendment, the Progressive Amendment, that gave the voters the opportunity to elect their United States senators. As many of you will know, the original Constitution assigned the selection of each state's 2 senators to the state legislatures. And one of the major reforms of the progressive period was to give the people the opportunity to choose their own senators and to take it out of the hands of politicians and political machines in urban America, that these decisions were being made in back rooms, in smoke-filled rooms, and that these political machines were appointing lackeys to go to Washington and represent the state. And so the argument is that a way to clean up a corrupt political system, a system that had been corrupted, was to turn the selection of United States senators over to citizens. So that was done, I believe, in 1913. I believe that's when that amendment was passed. Well, now, in the Levin book, the second proposal in his list of 10 amendments is an amendment to return selection of the United States Senate to the respective state legislatures. In other words, each state legislature would appoint its 2 senators. Third, in the list of proposed amendments an amendment to establish term limits for the Supreme Court and supermajority legislative override. This is a critical one. This amendment would change the Constitution in terms of the appointment of members, justices of the Supreme Court for life, and would replace lifetime appointments with 12-year term-limited terms of office. Also, this amendment would allow the states, two-thirds of the states, to override decisions of the Supreme Court. In effect, the Supreme Court would be interpreting the law, in other words, determining the constitutionality of legislation. State legislatures would have the power to overturn those decisions if they didn't like them. Fourth and fifth are two amendments designed to limit federal spending and the federal taxing power. In other words, this is the place where Levin addresses the so-called balanced budget amendment. Next, an amendment to limit the federal bureaucracy. What this amendment would do would be to eliminate these federal agencies that have been created and staffed with so-called civil servants, public employees, these bureaucratic agencies within the federal government that are immune from elections. That, in other words, whether the Republicans or the Democrats are in control of the government makes no difference. These agencies and the people in them continue to serve administration after administration after administration. What this amendment would do would be limit that federal bureaucracy by requiring that the agency in question would be up for a renewal vote every couple of years. I think it's every 3 years. That the federal government would have to revisit whether in fact we want that agency or not. And that the thinking is that would basically limit the size and the influence of the so-called federal bureaucracy. The next amendment would be an amendment to promote free enterprise. In other words, I'm making up my own word here, to constitutionalize a particular economic theory, which is the free market. That economic theory would now become part of the law of the land. And the one after that is connected to it as well, an amendment to protect private property. And as we know, when the founders talked about private property in the 18th century, they tended principally to be talking about land. But as we know today, the meaning of property has expanded tremendously. Now it involves investments and stock and all of these things in the investment world that are considered private property. So what that essentially means is to get out from under federal regulations in many of these areas. The next amendment would be an amendment to grant the states authority to directly amend the Constitution. Think about this. Once Article 5 in convention, then one of the changes proposed would be to scrap Article 5 by turning the right to amend the constitutions directly over governments and 3/4 of the states to approve them would be gone. Now all of that procedure would be reduced. Efficient approach of just letting the states get is an amendment to grant the states authority to check Congress. The state legislatures would also have the power to override Congress, laws passed by Congress. Not only could they override Supreme Court decisions, but they could also override laws passed by the Congress of the United States. And then the last one is an amendment to protect the vote by requiring voter IDs and reversing the trend to expand the opportunity to vote. The thinking is that it would not only get those who vote fraudulently out of the way, but it would also serve to exclude from the voting booths those that are considered to be incompetent and who shouldn't be able to vote because they really don't know what the issues are. In other words, the idea is reduce the right to vote back to the idea that it really is a right, and only those who can demonstrate that they know the issues should vote. Those are the amendments in quick, in kind of a quick survey. Now I want to go back to the piece to a piece, and there are many on the internet, which talk about what might happen at a second convention. Under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, if 2/3 of the states call for such a convention, it must take place. Limits where we have reached, and I wanted to. We just looked quickly at the 10 amendments being proposed in the Liberty Amendments. I want you to see how much of this is based on substance in those amendments. Change from a federal form of national government back to a confederacy, which was what existed prior to the adoption of the Constitution in 1789. No, not the confederacy that existed during the Civil War, the one that existed between the time we won the Revolutionary War and the time we adopted the U.S. Constitution. In other words, the Confederation period. We make them as concert. We could do away with the Federal Reserve, which creates money out of thin air. We could start printing our own real money. Backed by gold, silver, platinum, etc. Back to the gold standard. We could do away with the Code of Federal Regulations. We could do away with the Federal Register. We could put people ahead of animals and do away with rules that forbid development of land because some little creature lives on it. Which was created for the purposes of weaning the United States off import, achieving what it was created to do. They pay more for it.
Right, because there was a news story that just broke in the last day or so. The tar sands people announced that they have begun exporting tar sands crude through the southern leg of the Keystone XL pipeline.
Right, right.
And of course we have the Bakken formation, 1 million gallons of crude oil per every treaty that we have signed.
That's right. And what this basically suggests is that the extreme that's so evident in what I was reading is taking its marching orders from the Levin amendments. What that says to me, and I think what we need to focus on, is the fact that these aren't independent, crazies, that these people are being led and fed by the leaders of this movement and the money that's funding it. And these people are engaged in an active revolutionary movement to destroy this government. That's what we're dealing with here.
Right. Can we, and it goes back, and we've seen it in action, you know, the government shutdown that we had to live through a few months ago. I argued persistently, and I was one of the few who did, Dr. Bill, that what we were witnessing in the government shutdown was an open insurrection inside the government of the United States, because doesn't the Constitution have something to say about about elected officials?
Indeed, we could. Was the extent to which the Treaty of Peace, one of the things that the Treaty of Peace between Great Britain that granted American independence was approved in April of 1783. And one of the clauses in it was the fact that we would live up to our treaty obligations. And what that meant was many of the, especially southern states, that had been shipping tobacco through British merchant companies and, and making them rich. One of the things that many Southerners who were supporting independence, one of the reasons was they felt that once we declared independence, they wouldn't have to pay these debts that they owed to the British.
In other words, they were deadbeats?
They were basically looking to break these contractual obligations.
Wow, and we thought that was something that just came into currency
and
with Clive and Bundy.
And that's what these people are taught. Is that
because having enough nuclear weapons to destroy the Earth 1,000 times over, well, you never know when to destroy the Earth at that right.
To the Constitution, and that's the cover under which the Levin amendments are being talked about. Among the more educated are what Hamilton warned about. An example of powerful people within the states that are out to destroy the national government in any way, in any facet that it might exist. That's revolution.
Yeah, it is.
That's what we're seeing here.
Can I just ask you, this is an extremely personal question.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Would you want to live in a country where the Tea Partiers rewrote the Constitution?
This can't happen. These phone calls.
They threatened his life. They threatened his family.
And his life, and they threatened to blow up his business until he finally rescinded, and they showed a video where he basically bowed and said, and what these people will be legal. And that would make all of these gun owners violators of the law. So that what they're arguing is this is a sneaky way to take your guns away.
Well, and of course, it's not.
But it's obvious that
what's interesting, sometimes I have to live inside my own mind, of some sort of revolutionary movement.
Yes. Yes, we would. Yes, we would. But, what this suggests is the danger of unleashing this kind of thing and giving this kind of a substance to people. In other words, same kinds of things that the leaders did in the movement for independence. I mean, they're basically pulling off a revolution. And they're claiming the right to do it. And our ignorance,
you raise an issue there, Dr. Bill, and some of these legislative calls for a constitutional convention are, approaching 50 years old. Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah, some of them actually started in the 60s. Balanced budget amendment is to control or take away the power of the federal government to use its control over the economy to impose its will on the states. That states were forced to buy into federal legislation because they would suffer financial pain if they didn't. Yeah.
The intent of the framers is whatever's on their mind at the moment.
Yeah.
But there really, there is a real intent of the framers, as you've repeatedly shown.
Yeah.
Why in Article 5 of the Constitution, can you surmise, is it simply a matter of they put it in there, they put this state convention business in there, and they figured that Alexander Hamilton saying, listen, this is never going to be used, this is just boilerplate, that was enough? I mean, why not put in a clause that says, what is it, three-quarters of the states?
Right.
2/3? I wasn't sure which. I can't remember. But
yep.
Whatever number of the states having legislatures having called for a constitutional convention, the Congress shall call for one. Why didn't they put some sort of a limitation in there saying within a 2-year time period or within 5 years?
But I don't believe that they really ever thought that this would ever happen. And there's no question in my mind, but the reason it's in Article 5 at all is because Hamilton, for example, is pointing to it to reassure those who are afraid of the power of the Constitution once it's ratified. What he's doing is pointing out, so, you know, don't worry about a guts into power. It can come together and agree on amendments. But his concern is, once you get convened,
from the immediate past, yesterday's Supreme Court decision ratifying prayer in town hall meetings.
Right, right.
The Justice Kagan's dissent, as is so often the case with dissents these days, completely eviscerates the radical judicial reactionaryism of the majority. But let's consider that they declared that that states or municipal bodies or whatever having a prayer at the beginning of the meeting is harmless. That's what they said. It's harmless.
Yes.
And anybody who doesn't like it can get up and walk out of the room.
That's right.
I doubt if you and I share their opinion. I know I don't.
No, we don't. And you know, and they also made the case that made the point that these are not children. In other words, children would be reluctant to walk out, but we're dealing with adults who would. And what they're talking and what they have is a revolving system of preachers who come in and deliver the prayer, so it's not all one. I mean, that's and you know, it strikes back in the early 19th century during the Jackson Boston Protestantism, which means as long as we focus on the truth that Jesus Christ is, everybody believes that. The people that don't, they don't count.
Well, it was not created for Muslims,
but at the same time, it would be prayer, and that seems to be what this court.
Heavenly Father, and in the name of Jesus, going on.
Right. Right.
So there's, you know, and the reason I brought all of that up, Dr. Bill, is because there is a strong theocratic country.
Coordinated, and the influence of the money and the court decisions on allowing big money, corporate money, to infiltrate the political process, and by labeling it speech and all the rest of all of this stuff is feeding
element, such as they style themselves,
right?
Who say, heck yeah, let's have a constitutional convention, and then we'll take care of Citizens United once and for all, and we'll all have lollipops and unicorns, and we'll be a happy country again.
It's unbelievable. It is unbelievable.
Well, it is crazy to think that in convention assembled, you're going to control the Tea Party, the Levins, the Koch brothers. So, Dr. Bill, I've seen that our connection has been even affected.
Our connection is.
So, shall we just wrap up?
Go ahead.
No. All I said is I'll leave you.
People can really understand it and appreciate how serious it really is.
Thank you, Dr. Bill.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Bob. We're at 50 minutes after the hour, and it is indeed time to bring this issue to a conclusion. I think that what we need to be agreement among states prior to the convening of such a convention would contain it and would be an effective way to control it and keep it focused on one particular issue. I think that is a period of civil rights. It began during the period of the idea that the federal government was trampling on states' rights by promoting things like integrated schools in the Brown decision and busing that occurred in the follow-up decisions of the Supreme Court, and especially in the Mecklenburg decision in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, where the Supreme Court endorsed busing and basically said, when we said with all deliberate speed in 1954 in Brown versus Board of Education, we didn't put that in there so to give states sickly on buses. And if a state has to begin busing students around out of their own neighborhoods to achieve the integration that we talked about in 1954, then the states will do that. And of course, as we know, cities like Boston exploded with all of this thing over busing in the 1970s, and I can kind of remember that myself. So the point is, you've got people that are finding ways to interpret the law the way that suits them, the way that they want to see. They're choosing to interpret the law the way that it best fits their agenda. And what we're seeing here with this Second Amendment issue is the same kind of thing. We are seeing evidences of committed ideologues who are building this movement and pouring money into political campaigns, into local political and congressional campaigns, in order to build up the kind of support at a state level that's going to make movement like this have much better chance of success. We can't be lulled into this argument that it's unfair to point out what might happen. What we need to do is undertake an honest debate and discussion, a national conversation, if you will, on the changes needed in the Constitution of the United States. People are willing to go. They are fabricating evidence. They are misusing the evidence from the past. They are doing a disservice to the founders and to the history of this country, and they're basing it all on the lack of understanding on the on the educational level. People who